Okay, so sorry, I'm doing this on a new tablet, so I'm trying to figure some things out as we go along. Hopefully, it's not too janky. Let's talk about emotions in romantic literature. So, there was a real mistrust of things that were too emotional in revolutionary lit because, again, they're trying to found this new nation on rational thinking and cooler heads prevailing, and a nation built on logic and reason, and it's the great experiment and all that. So there's this sense of emotion is for people with nothing better to do with their lives. But Romanticism said no, it's actually really enjoyable and an important part of the human experience to have this catharsis where we can feel things that aren't actually necessarily happening to us, and that can really only happen through literature. So there was, again, a new emphasis on emotion in general in romantic literature, but also things that we would normally consider negative. But it's kind of like the reason why people like watching scary movies, right? That sense of apprehension and horror and dread and everything, but it's not actually happening to you. But for most people anyway, they really enjoy that. There's a kind of relief that comes through that. So romantic literature and art was really one of that they understood that very well. And so there was a lot of emphasis on that. And then also this sense of awe as well, being confronted by something that is just almost defies description. And though they certainly do a lot of description, I mean, something to focus on when reading Washington Irving's stories is the descriptions. He's almost like a filmmaker in a lot of ways. Obviously you have to use your imagination, but he's really good at kind of starting big and zooming in tightly on these scenes. Like the opening of Rip Van Winkle, we've got the Catskill Mountains, basically, like upstate New York. And it's that spectacular time of year that people travel from all over to see. And he describes it in this almost like movie-like detail and starts big and just kind of zooms in on this tiny village where we get to meet our narrator. It's really neat. But that kind of sense of awe and magic from humans kind of living with and interacting with nature. And then something in particular that romantic authors were interested was this concept of the sublime, not that band from the 90s, though they were great too. The sublime's kind of hard to explain, but it's that feeling that you get when you are confronting something so awe-inspiring and big and vast in nature that it makes you feel really small and vulnerable, but in a good way. So if you've ever been up to the top of a mountain, or you've ever been to the Bald Rock on Caesar's Head and looked out over the landscape, that feeling you get where you're just in awe of everything you see, or you've maybe been to the Grand Canyon or something like that, where you just, the majesty of what you're looking at just kind of takes your breath away. That's the sublime. So they're very interested in trying to kind of bottle and capture that emotion in literature. Also, they really drew on, there's this kind of return to the wisdom, I guess, but also not wisdom, but kind of the homespun, folksy kind of thing, where it's folklore, local customs and superstitions. Irving is huge on that. And so if you were in a face-to-face class with me right now, I would have you all get into groups and I would have you find 2 examples of this kind of literary inspiration in Irving's stories. And there's tons in both of them throughout the stories. And you could tell he was really interested in trying to capture that kind of side of American life. And maybe you might have to do that for test 2. Who knows? It could happen. What? Uh-oh. I don't know what just happened. Gosh, bear with me, y'all. I'm trying to figure this out. Let's see here. Moving forward. Can't see the buttons. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Thanks for bearing with me. So why all of this emphasis? Again, there's this sense of like reading as a form of escape. And so what are they escaping? They're escaping massive population growth. There's this real desire to kind of go out and be alone and traipse around in the woods and just be your own self. Of course, it was just guys doing this. Ladies, we had work to do at home, right? But But yeah, the sense of like, oh, there's too many people and I must go to the woods and get away. Again, that kind of urban sprawl, where more and more human encroachment kind of coming out and taking away from nature. And again, that industrialism that was the result of the Industrial Revolution, and things just becoming more and more mechanized and less intimate, less individual craftsmanship kind of a thing. And again, to embrace this sense of the exotic, the unfamiliar, things that are sort of that are far away and distant, and something that can only be dreamt about. And again, to really harness the power of the human imagination. I mean, they didn't feel like that was a waste of time. They felt it was a that art for art's sake and reading for enjoyment were wonderful things. So with that, again, some more emphasis in Romantic thinking. There's a really strong commitment to a sense of individualism, and this is where we really get the rise of the concept of American individualism. Again, it's kind of a weird paradox that we have, the nationalistic view of the American identity and the way that can conflict with individualism, like our sense of who we are as individuals and whether it's even possible to be truly an individual in that kind of society. Is there anything more insulting in American culture than to be told you're just like everyone else? I mean, I defy you to think of something more insulting than that. Again, this concept of like the self and how it can unfold over the course of events, and how one needs to like go out and find themselves, so to speak, rather than being told who you are by society or what position you were born into, what in life. This idea of like human potential, and that the self needs to develop and unfold over the course of your life and through events. A real emphasis on intuition, this belief that we all have a strong intuitive perception capability. If we listen to that, then the truth can be found there versus all around us from other people. And there was an assumption that the natural world was inherently good and human society was corrupt. So that's going to be really important when we get to the Transcendentalist movement. So you're probably already starting to see some weird conflicting themes happening here, and that is why we end up kind of branching off in the two directions with Transcendentalism and Gothicism. So it was a really popular style, and it influences so much of TV and movie making and literature to this day. In fact, I've had students in the past find examples of that as their free-for-all assignment, like examples from film and TV and stuff where they felt like these kinds of themes were still in play and influencing the popular culture we still enjoy. So it did speak to a much wider audience, and books were a lot cheaper, thanks in part to the Industrial Revolution that it was railing against. So that's interesting, right? Isn't that always the way? So it was just a lot easier to get a hold of these copies of these books for people to read. And it appealed to that revolutionary spirit of America, this idea that like we are different than everyone else. We are out making our way and doing our own thing. And also, we're going to talk in the Transcendentalist unit of the course about the second Great Awakening, because there's a second one. And it actually aligns really kind of perfectly with what's going on with this. It's kind of a perfect storm of good stuff. But so Romantic thinkers really were breaking away from, again, strict stricter religious traditions. It's more, again, about like looking within and stuff like that to find the truth. It also rejected rationalism and this idea of like religious intellectualism, that again the truth has to be found in texts and in dry rational thinking and dogma. The truth is out there to be felt and intuited. Much more character-driven writing and much less instructional writing. People were sick of that. So like if we look at Hannah Foster's The Coquette, it is character-driven, but it's also got it's pretty heavy-handed in how instructional it is, especially for young women about how to behave or not behave. And I think people were getting a little tired of that. And it's more just about enjoying characters for all of their strengths and weaknesses, their foibles, if you will. So when it comes to character building, it would be much more personal and much more intense in how those characters were built. A lot more emotion, like we said, which that was distrusted and thought of as like feminine and European and decadent. Now it's like, no, it's interesting to, again, and cathartic to read about these. There's a real delight in free expression without feeling like you're going to be ridiculed or that you're going to inspire controversy. It's like, yeah, let's all kind of let it hang out a little bit. Everybody was just kind of ready for that after the rigors of revolutionary thinking. And there was a lot more effort put into developing the psychological profiles of characters as well. So that's something, again, that if you were in a face-to-face class, I would have you talking about and looking for examples of. So I've got Rip Van Winkle in the picture on the left. I've got, Ichabod Crane on the right. And they're both pretty round, fairly well-developed characters, but they both have a lot of foibles and a lot of things that are, like Rip Van Winkle, for instance. He's got a lot of very positive traits, and he's, for one thing, he's just like everybody's best buddy, right? I mean, he's just like such a relentlessly positive, nice guy. And he's like always willing to help out and blah, blah, blah. But then when you look at the way that he treats his own family, I mean, it's pretty deplorable, right? So like real people, and same thing with Ichabod Crane. I mean, he's got very positive traits about him as a character, but then there's a lot of things about him that are just like laughably flawed, right? In both characters, it's laughable, and it's enjoyable to kind of watch them go about their business in these stories, because they're unpredictable as characters, because characters that are completely positive or completely negative are very predictable. You know exactly what they're going to do. They're going to do the right thing or they're going to do the wrong thing, and it's kind of impossible to say as you go along with these characters, because they, again, have a lot of positive and negative traits, and that's good storytelling, good character building in general. I mean, that's what we enjoy in our protagonists today, right? So, same deal. And then, again, we've kind of touched on this, but this is going to branch out into two directions. There's going to be the Transcendentalist movement. The big three figures for that would be, and two of which we're going to read. We don't have time for Whitman, unfortunately, though I highly recommend Leaves of Grass if you want to read some Whitman. Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman were the big three. And then their thing was to combine the rationalism of the revolutionary Enlightenment thinking with this, again, romantic sense of faith in the individual self and developing your own individual self and ego, versus Gothicism, which is a much darker and more negative take. We've got Edgar Allan Poe, of course, the darkest of all, Hawthorne, who's got his issues too, and then Irving kind of skirts the line because he's a little bit more silly and just satirical, but he's a lot more silly and satirical, but he's considered a Gothic writer too. And this is, of course, entertaining to us and continues to be, but they were really looking at how the shadows of the past can be cast upon the present and can kind of haunt us in the present day. So we'll talk more about that when we get to the Gothic lit section. Okay, till then, adios.